YouTube versus podcasts. Which is better for experts trying to get clients?
Now, if this is you right now, the expert or consultant online who's been told a million different things to do or methods to try to build a personal brand online that attract dream clients regularly without having to rely on referrals. Everything from write a book, post 3 times a day, DM every single person who likes your post.
Oh no.
Run ads 24/7.
Ads? More like ad libs.
Now, if you clicked on this video, we're going to make the assumption that you've probably ruled out many of these already on the basis that things like running ads 24/7 as a way to grow your business, or posting 3 times a day just for the rest of eternity, especially when it's like short form content, probably makes your skin crawl.
A key emphasis on the for eternity.
You're probably leaning towards the longer form content options here, such as a YouTube channel or a podcast.
Hence why you likely click this video.
And so that's what we're here to help you decide today. I'm Tig.
I'm Anthony. And after writing 5 books, releasing over 390 podcast episodes, and sending more than 1 million outreach messages, we eventually realized that using long form content to attract clients into our business was the best way for us. And we've since helped 300 plus clients also build niche personal brands that attract dream clients with audio and video podcasts.
But in that time, we've also seen so many business owners fail miserably at long form content because of how different the expectations can differ to reality.
So to make getting clients through content without posting on social media 10 times easier for you, here is an honest side-by-side comparison on whether YouTube or audio podcasts are best for you based on your specific situation.
So we're going to make things very simple for you. We're going to break down YouTube versus audio podcast as a way to grow your business and get clients as an expert, graded in these 4 criteria. Number 1, how difficult are they to start?
Number 2, how difficult is it to maintain?
Number 3, how difficult is it to be discovered on each platform?
And number 4, how difficult is it to convert, to get clients through these mediums?
So let's get started with number 1, how hard is it to start? So we're talking about the technical setup, the equipment needed, and the time investment before you can publish your first piece of content. So the first benefit of starting a YouTube channel is that if you're experienced with being good on camera and creating videos, then it's not going to feel too hard to start a YouTube channel.
Now, the flip side of the coin is if you aren't someone who's comfortable on camera, starting a YouTube channel is going to be so much more difficult. It's going to be a lot more challenging because you're not used to being on camera presenting.
There's a lot of unseen weight here that gets added if it feels like even a little bit extra effort to turn on a camera rather than just record something into a microphone. And we find this with many clients who think it's going to be easy, but end up spending way longer than they thought, things like preparing how they look, preparing to look at the camera rather than read notes, and all these little factors that come into it. And then on top of that, it also requires more things to set up. For example, a camera, of course, lighting, a good visual setup. These are all considerations that only come into YouTube, but don't matter if you were just starting an audio podcast.
Now, on the other hand, if you were to start an audio podcast, it is very straightforward. It's just you with a mic and your voice.
And there's no added pressure of how you look on camera.
Now, I think we both know this, right? Because the last 3 years, we've had an audio-only podcast. And for the longest time, we didn't want to start video because of the reasons we shared. Now, when we went through the experience of starting this YouTube channel and actually going on video, it became so obvious how much harder it is to actually just put on a camera, literally just having a camera at your face when you're recording a podcast episode creates a whole dimension, not even a whole dimension, multiple layers of dimension of complexity that you didn't think about before. Like my friend here, Ty, spending 20 minutes to do his hair. Or like myself, thinking about what's my posture looking like? How am I talking? All of a sudden now I'm thinking out loud, did that sound good? Did it sound bad? Even though when I'm just recording an audio, I'm talking, but I don't have these thoughts in my head of if it sounds good or if it sounds bad, which is strange, right? You wouldn't think a camera would do that to you, but apparently it does.
Apparently it does. After doing hundreds of audio-only podcast episodes, we thought that starting video would just be as simple as doing the same thing, but turning on a camera and adding that into the equation. It actually ended up us thinking about choosing what to wear,
looking at YouTube stats as well as podcast analytics,
getting good at lighting,
confused at why episode titles work on Apple and Spotify, but don't on YouTube,
figuring out looking at the camera versus reading your notes,
and getting thousands of DMs each day from growth experts who've checked out your channel.
Realizing how visually poor your content really is on YouTube and how far you have to go compared to your competitors.
Mentally preparing to be on camera.
And becoming a thumbnail expert. So in summary, if you're good at video, if you're already in the habit of doing video, none of this really matters too much. But if you're not already in the habit of doing video, it is certainly easier to start with an audio podcast on Apple and Spotify. And you can always then add video and add that to YouTube later into the equation when you're ready.
The second part, how hard is it to maintain? Now, this really is the week-to-week time commitment of video versus audio. So we're looking at the production workload as well as the structure requirements to maintain a consistent schedule.
Now, the first thing to know is when it comes to maintaining the quality of your output on a week-to-week basis, obviously you have to review your analytics and know what to optimize for.
Do you? Thought you just publish content, get views, and attract dream clients, baby. Is that not the gig?
That's why most businesses fail, Anthony.
Ooh, okay.
So YouTube has many, many metrics specifically per episode, per video. You look at views, impressions, click-through rate, views from impressions, unique viewers, average view duration, average view percent.
We get the gist. There's a ton of metrics you have to focus on when it comes to YouTube. I think it's like over 20 metrics that you can track.
And that's just per video alone, not even like on a channel level. Whereas on the audio podcast, you have 2. Downloads, otherwise known as listens or plays, which is simply how many people clicked play on your episode, and retention time, which is a visual graph of how long through your episode you kept people on average, showing exactly where people drop off. Which brings us to the first benefit of YouTube in terms of maintaining it, which is there are over 20 metrics to obsess over every time you publish an episode.
Now, if you're a data scientist or a complete stat nerd, you would love the fact you get so many analytics from YouTube. But if you're looking for simplicity, it's likely to overwhelm you. So this really is a double-edged sword. There's a pro, tons of metrics. There's a con, tons of metrics. It depends on who you are and how you like to operate.
Now, something that's more of an objective con, videos need much tighter structure, meaning it's going to be more effort on a week-to-week basis to maintain because of low average retention times. Anthony, why do videos on YouTube have a lower average watch time or retention time than audio podcasts on Apple and Spotify?
Well, the main reason is the fact that on YouTube, the viewers are constantly distracted by different videos. You see that little recommendation tab to the left? That's just like with all these flashy thumbnails and these crazy titles, trying and fighting for your audience's attention. And unfortunately, your audience's attention on YouTube, more times than not, isn't very good, meaning they're easily distracted. They will click on those videos.
But not you. You're looking at the thumbnails on your right-hand side now, but you're not going to click them. You're staying with us till the end. Now, we're going to talk more about retention time and how that affects your overall business later. But the point is, from a maintaining weekly workload perspective, videos take more work because they need to be way tighter. On top of that, you have thumbnails, visual editing, and the extra scripting that do add significant extra workflow. What about an audio podcast?
Well, with an audio podcast, you have 2 simple metrics, like we spoke about. Total downloads for an episode, meaning how many individuals listen to the episode, and then you have the retention time. How much of your content did the average listener consume? Whilst at the same time, if you are a data scientist and nerd, like we spoke about, maybe the data you get from the streaming platforms like Apple and Spotify will actually frustrate you because you'd rather have way more data. So again, a double-edged sword as well.
Now, the obvious pro in comparison to YouTube is that there's no camera, thumbnails, or anything like that to worry about, meaning the workflow on a week-to-week basis is much quicker for that.
But of course, they can be a big con. This is an equalizer. If you have guests and you're having to research the guest, reach out to the guest, get the guest on, run the interview, share content with the guest afterwards, do email follow-ups, all of that stuff does add another layer of complexity. Now, for our clients, we actually don't recommend interview-style podcasts because for most business owners, this is a terrible way to grow your business. You're essentially inviting an expert onto your podcast, giving the spotlight to them, they share all their values, all their insights, and they walk away with more business than you. So we encourage our clients to focus on solo shows, which removes the complexity of having guests on, but also guarantees they have expert positioning and can convert their audience into clients for their business because they're the person seen as the expert.
For example, Martin right here, who is an acting consultant, and he generated $30,000 in a single month simply from having an audio-only but specifically a solo podcast. He didn't have any guests, meaning every single episode he released, listeners spent more time building trust with him, viewing him as the expert, and then reaching out to him for help. So he was able to not only grow his podcast and build a personal brand through Apple and Spotify, but also generate clients because of the fact it was a solo podcast. And tying this all back to maintaining the weekly workload also saved him more time than if he was having guests too. Now, the third component here is how hard is it to get discovered on the algorithm and on the platform itself. So let's compare how the YouTube algorithm works compared to Apple and Spotify, and also the level of competition you're up against.
So as you can see, when it comes to the demand versus supply graph, for audio, we have 600 million active podcast listeners every single month. And then the supply is 400,000. So that's a big gap as far as the number of people who are consuming content versus the number of podcasts actually publishing episodes regularly. On the other hand, we have YouTube, where we have 2.7 billion monthly users who are on the platform. But in comparison, we also have 120 million active YouTube channels.
The number of people listening per podcast means that there are 1,500 listeners per podcast out there. Compared to on YouTube, because there are 120 million channels, but only in comparison 2.7 billion, which sounds crazy saying only 2.7 billion, but actually when you look at the proportions, that's only 22 viewers per channel, meaning that there's way less competition and way more listeners per piece of content on audio platforms.
So at first glance, it feels like the opportunity is bigger when it comes to YouTube. But when you have the actual comparison of the potential viewer per channel, you see they paint a totally different picture. Another thing that paints a totally different picture is the fact that when it comes to podcasts, the monthly listeners over the last 4 years has been increasing significantly. It's almost doubled. Whilst at the same time, and this is something that most experts, consultants are completely unaware of, is the fact that the number of active podcasts publishing every single month is actually on the decline over the last 4 years. That's almost halved in that time, which means we have a supply that's increasing over time and a demand that's only getting smaller. To me, that sounds like a golden opportunity.
So with that context in mind, how hard is it to get discovered on each? Now, on YouTube, we can't ignore the fact that it's a much bigger platform with much bigger browsing volume potential. And on that, the algorithm can boost your content to new audiences with a lot more, let's say, flair, with a lot more virality baked into how the platform works. It's much less unusual for a YouTube video to get, let's say, 10,000 views when that channel normally only gets 100 views than it is for that to happen on Apple and Spotify. And that's because there are simply way more people on the platform. So when things take off, they can really, really take off.
Now, the con here is the fact that you have to actually crack the YouTube algorithm, which can take years, and oftentimes it does take years, sometimes even a decade to really figure out. The other con is, that we haven't mentioned on here, is the fact that you have to play the game of the algorithm, which means it's not just like your content you have to think about and making that exceptionally good, is then also how do I get this content to match what the algorithm actually wants? And then finally, it's extremely competitive and is only getting more and more competitive every single year. There are over 120 million active channels hosting, which means for you to stand out, gain traction, sign clients is way more challenging. Whereas with the audio side of things, the pros are, well, there's a growing demand whilst the supply is shrinking, which is a huge opportunity that most experts or consultants are completely unaware of. Cracking Apple and Spotify's algorithm takes way less time and really around 6 months for you to start climbing the ranks, as well as the fact that the algorithm and how it works is very simple. Hence why when it comes to the analytics you're given, they're very simple. It's not overly complicated. The process is very straightforward.
The obvious con is, again, in comparison to YouTube, the overall volume of people searching and browsing on the platform is smaller than YouTube. We can't ignore that. It has to be said and restated that, yes, although cracking the algorithm takes way longer, there are still way more people on YouTube. But that's not to say that exponential growth or going quote unquote viral doesn't happen at all on Apple and Spotify. This is the graph of one of our clients called Todd, who is an expert on stress management for highly sensitive people. In fact, that's also the name of his podcast, as you can see here on the right. Now, as you can see with the main graph here, Todd was struggling to break 500 listens a month for years. And then as soon as he started working with us, you can see that he started to grow consistently. And then he did manage to really take off and get that exponential growth, go completely viral, quote unquote, on Apple and Spotify, and then retain most of that exposure that he got. And at this point, this graph was taken halfway into the month. So I'm sure he's going to do just as well, if not better. All that to say, with that small amount of volume on Apple and Spotify, there's still 600 million, still twice the population of America. And proportionally, a lot more of that is in English-speaking Western countries than YouTube. So there's still huge potential for you to build a personal brand that relies entirely on Apple and Spotify, that attracts clients regularly without social media at all through a solo podcast on Apple and Spotify.
And finally, how hard is it to convert? So this is all about how easy or hard is it to build trust and to get prospects to take your call to action.
We got this stat recently because Amy Porterfield shared it in one of our own podcast episodes. In summary, is that podcast hosts rank just below friends and family in recommendation trust, beating every other marketing channel, including influencers, celebrities, and media personalities, when it comes to how much the prospect trusts what they're hearing. So when it comes to building trust online, no other marketing channel gets as close to a personal friend or family recommendation as podcasting does.
Totally different context, but this is the exact reason, this trust building factor is exactly why you have people like Donald Trump, the president, like him, hate him. That's not the point. The point being, you have presidents who are going on to other people's shows doing what they call podcast tours, where they tour around on the biggest podcasts on earth because they understand that as far as trust building mediums goes, nothing comes close to podcast. They're not collaborating with YouTubers, they're collaborating specifically with podcasters.
So how hard is it to keep your prospects' attention till the end of your content and get them to take your call to action, whether that's to book a call with you, to take your lead magnet, or to come further into your world? On YouTube, seeing your face repeatedly certainly helps with building trust. The more people see your face, the more recognizable your visual brand is.
It's way easier for them to take the call to action because they're on their screen, they're watching the video, and they can quite easily go to the description and click the buttons.
And that's way easier than if you're walking out on the commute or at the gym listening to a podcast in your ear. Your hand's not free to then click the call to action the same way that it is on YouTube. Now, the caveat here is with YouTube, because there's so much more distraction and so much other reasons to click a different video, like Anthony mentioned earlier, a lot of the time, prospects don't even finish the video to get to your call to action in the first place. And this is a big problem that most creators don't see until it's too late.
And then not to talk about the fact that for a lot of people, if it doesn't feel natural for you to be on video, it feels very performative. So it can feel way less authentic and feel way more salesy.
Are you saying we're not authentic right now?
No. What I am saying is if you're someone who doesn't feel authentic when you're on camera and you're giving a call to action and you feel salesy, likelihood is the audience on the other side are feeling that vibes from you and is actually putting them off from taking that action.
Now, the audio podcast, on the other hand, listeners are more likely to complete the episode and hear your call to action in comparison to a YouTube video. Like we just said before, people listen to podcasts when they're commuting to work, going for a walk, at the gym, doing chores, around the house, things where when they put it on, it's in their ear. And as long as the podcast isn't really bad, they're generally committed and will listen the whole way through. So they're more likely to get to the end and hear what you have to say.
Now, we know this after speaking to hundreds of podcasts where they've uploaded the same piece of content on YouTube versus audio. And when we look at their retention time, how much of their content do their audience consume? On the podcast is oftentimes 3 to 4 times more in comparison to YouTube. So yes, whilst it's easier for someone to take action on YouTube, because most people don't consume that content, they never hear the CTA. Whereas with podcasts, they do consume that content. They build a connection with you and build trust with you at a much faster rate in comparison to YouTube.
Now, one final con with the audio podcast is, again, what we touched on a moment ago, where listeners may be hands-free when they hear your call to action. So from a technical perspective, it's not quite as easy to physically click that link or book that call as it is off the back of watching a YouTube video. Now, going back to the example of our client Todd, who had a podcast called Stress Management for Highly Sensitive People, you saw the growth he experienced from Apple and Spotify's algorithms. This resulted in revenue and clients from him as well. This was just recently after he had that big spike, Shortly after Todd had that big spike in listenership, he closed $11,000 in deals in listeners becoming high-ticket clients of his. And needless to say, this has only increased since then, as you saw by the graph. All to say, yes, listeners may not have their hands at the ready to click links as much when they're listening to podcasts, but they sure do build trust with you, stick around, get to the end of your episode and want to come back, so that when they're ready to take that next step and when they want to work with an expert, you are the obvious choice.
So with YouTube, there is a higher barrier to start.
Whereas with an audio podcast, there's a lower barrier.
With YouTube, there's a lot more workload that's involved to keep a consistent schedule.
Whereas for an audio podcast, as long as you're doing a solo podcast and not a long, boring, overdone weekly interview with guests, it will be a lighter workload.
With YouTube, discovery is way harder.
And with audio podcasts, although there's less total users on the platform, proportionally it's way easier to be discovered.
For YouTube, it's way easier for your viewers to take your call to action.
With podcast, it is harder because they're usually hands-free when they hear it.
And then finally, with YouTube, retention time. Keeping someone's attention so you can build trust, so you can be viewed as an expert, so they can hear your call to action, is significantly harder and more challenging.
Whereas than an audio podcast where this naturally is a lot higher. So look, the question isn't about which platform is better, although you've probably deduced our biased opinion from this video. It's really about which one is worth your time to sign high-ticket clients without turning into a full-time content creator, data analyst, or presenter.
So look, after watching this video, if you are convinced that you should ditch the idea of starting a YouTube channel and that podcast may be the right thing for you, my encouragement is for you to go to the description, click the first link that you see, and book a call where we'll walk you through a demo of how to launch a successful podcast that builds your authority and allows you to sign high-ticket clients consistently.